So, let's talk about one of the most incredible stories in modern history. How did a handful of colonies, just clinging to the edge of a vast continent, grow into the world's one and only superpower? It's quite a journey.
Our source material kicks things off with a really bold statement. It compares the United States today, with all its military, economic, and cultural might, to the Roman Empire. That's a huge claim. And that really gets to the heart of it, right? How did that happen? How do you get from a few rough, violent settlements to a global powerhouse? It's a story full of incredible ambition, sure, but also deep and often very violent contradictions. Okay, let's dive in.
First thing we have to get our heads around is that none of this was a sure thing. The beginning of the story isn't some grand tale of triumph. It was really just a desperate day-to-day fight for survival.
And when you look at the timeline, it's pretty wild. You have this brief Norse settlement way back around 1000 AD, and then almost 500 years of silence. Then Columbus arrives in 1492, and suddenly the floodgates open. It kicked off this mad dash among all the European powers to grab a piece of this quote-unquote new world. And this slide just perfectly shows how risky it all was. I mean, we all hear about Jamestown, right? The first permanent English settlement. But even it barely survived. And for every Jamestown, there was a failure, like Roanoke, an entire colony that just disappeared, vanished. It's a sobering reminder of how tough this was.
Okay, so just 12 years after Jamestown gets its footing, this year comes along, and it is a moment that will cast a shadow over everything, and I mean everything that comes next.
Because in 1619, the first enslaved Africans were brought to Virginia. At the exact same time, the foundations for a new society based on freedom were being laid, so was the foundation for its most profound and tragic conflict. This was the start of an institution that would be at the very center of the American story for centuries to come. So you have to wonder, how did these separate, struggling little outposts start to see themselves as something more, as one thing? Well, this next chapter is all about that shift, from just surviving to building a whole new identity, one completely separate from Great Britain.
And ironically, the very war that cemented British control over North America is what ended up dooming it. For the first time, colonists from New England, Georgia were fighting alongside each other. And when it was all over, Britain was left with a gigantic bill.
And that war debt set off a chain reaction, like dominoes falling. Britain needed cash, so it started passing new taxes. The colonists fired back, "Hey, we don't have anyone representing us in Parliament." That famous cry, "No taxation without representation," was born. Protests got bigger, tensions got higher, until finally it all just exploded into open war. And right out of the heart of that rebellion comes this absolutely radical, world-changing idea. The idea that you could build a nation not on the bloodline of a king, but on the self-evident truth that every single person has rights.
But there's that contradiction again, isn't it? As powerful as those words were, a part of the original Declaration of Independence that condemned the slave trade was cut out. Why? To make sure all 13 colonies, including the southern slaveholding ones, would sign on. So the nation was literally born with this incredible ideal of liberty and a compromise to protect slavery. All right, so independence is one. The brand new country starts looking west, and the 19th century just becomes this story of incredible, explosive growth. It was all driven by this powerful idea of destiny. But that destiny came with a terrible, terrible price. And this was the idea that lit the fire, manifest destiny. It was this powerful belief that America had a God-given right, even a duty, to expand from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific. It was basically a moral justification for taking over the entire continent. And if you really want to understand the price of that destiny, you have to look past the grand ideas and focus on the human toll. And that story, for so many, starts with this one heartbreaking number. That's more than 60,000 people. Men, women, and children from 5 sovereign nations, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole. They were forced from their homes, from the lands their ancestors had lived on for centuries, and marched west. This brutal forced migration, the Trail of Tears, was a direct result of that relentless westward expansion. Meanwhile, as the country got bigger, that question of slavery just got louder and more dangerous. This table does a great job of showing the political tightrope the country was walking. For decades, they held the Union together with these shaky compromises, basically adding states in pairs, one free, one slave, just to keep the balance of power from tipping over. But you can only kick that can down the road for so long. Eventually, that balancing act failed. The compromises fell apart, and the nation faced its most brutal test, a war against itself. And the trigger, the thing that finally broke it all, was the election of Abraham Lincoln. His platform wasn't even to abolish slavery where it existed, just to stop it from spreading to new territories. But for the South, that was the final straw. It was a direct threat to their entire way of life. South Carolina walked out, and the whole thing just fractured. And the reasons for fighting were incredibly clear and very different. The Union started out fighting just to keep the country in one piece. Over time, that goal grew to include ending slavery for good. The Confederacy, though, was pretty clear from the start. They were fighting to create their own country specifically so they could preserve and protect the institution of slavery.
The cost of that war, well, it's almost impossible to comprehend. It's all summed up in this one staggering number. Think about that. Even today, with all the wars that have been fought since, the Civil War is still the deadliest conflict in American history. It was just a horrific, bloody price to finally answer the question of what kind of country this was going to be.
But out of that trial by fire, a new version of the country emerged, one that was fundamentally redefined. These 3 amendments to the Constitution didn't just end slavery, they rewrote the rules of what it meant to be a citizen in America, at least on paper.
And that's really where this chapter ends. The war settled the question of slavery and it kept the country together. But when Reconstruction ended in 1877, the federal government basically stepped away from protecting the rights of its newest citizens. The nation was whole again, but that original promise of equality for all, well, that was a battle that was far from over.